And then after a while, we managed to get this maybe worse spot. This is place out the back of Real Estate Agent. We'll stick up some photos to what that was like. But people were...
You'd have to walk past these real estate agents just to get into the office.
We must have driven them insane because
there was a lot of people out the back.
Yeah, all of these like young interns, people who've flown in from all around the world, just constantly walking through this estate agent because it was basically just like their back room that for some reason they were renting out.
Yeah, like one of our early donors came when we gave him a tour, and when he like came into the office, his first reaction was, "Is this legal?"
Yeah, I doubt it.
Because there's kind of like 10 people or like 8 people in this tiny room.
Hey listeners, Rob here, Head of Research at 80,000 Hours. Last year, our CEO, Benjamin Todd, stepped down after 10 years straight leading 80,000 Hours, most of those years of which I was also around for. You might well be familiar with Benjamin's work because he was the main author of our career guide, as well as the main author of many research pieces on our website. And he came on the 80,000 Hours podcast for episode 71, Benjamin Todd on the key ideas of 80,000 Hours. And again in 2020 for a conversation on the varieties of long-termism and things that we might be getting wrong, among other topics. I thought that Benjamin passing the torch would be a nice moment to reminisce together about the history of our organization, including how it got off the ground, our scrappy early days, our move to America and back, some of the highs that we've had, and various mistakes we think that we've made along the way. I guess they call this an oral history, or at least it's the stuff we could still remember as of 2022. My memory of all those times keeps getting worse as the years go on, so the sooner we got down those memories, the less distorted I thought that would be. Though the further things are away in time, the more nostalgia I seem to feel about them. So maybe I'll be telling my grandkids about our crazy office out the back of an estate agent when I'm 90. Fingers crossed. Note that this was recorded quite a long time ago in June 2022, and a fair bit has happened since then. There's probably various different things that we might emphasize or talk about if we were recording now. I think this is actually by far the longest gap we've ever had from recording to releasing something, but given that this was all about getting down, some long-term history, and it didn't feel super urgent, it kept getting bumped in favor of editing other interviews that did have more urgency to them. If you, listener, couldn't care less about 80,000 Hours as an organization, this one probably isn't for you. But if you're considering starting a new nonprofit or a think tank or otherwise promoting important ideas as a writer or community organizer, this might offer some useful insight into what it's like, or at least what it was like for us. Alternatively, if we've influenced your career or worldview and you're just curious to know more about where this whole 80,000 Hours project and all of our ideas came from, how they've evolved over time, and what Ben and I are like as people, this also gives you some window into all of that. Separate from that, in a funny coincidence, 80,000 Hours is actually doing a hiring round to find a new CEO right now, because our previous CEO, Howie Lempel, is moving on to a role at Open Philanthropy. We're currently accepting expressions of interest in the role, and we're doing that until the 10th of December, so not that long in the future, and you want to get your expressions of interest in soon, if indeed you are interested. On top of that, there is a decent chance that we promote someone from within 80,000 Hours to become CEO, which would create a vacancy in another senior leadership position. So at the same time as we're soliciting expressions of interest in the CEO role, we're also asking people to let us know if they might be interested in becoming our Director of Internal Systems, our Website Director, or our Director of Special Projects, should one of those positions happen to open up. You can find the job ad for this on our website at 80,000hours.org/latest, or if you Google 80,000 Hours Work With Us, that should bring you to a page listing all of our vacancies, both now and anytime. I'll say a little about the role at the end of the episode, and there really is plenty to say. But if you really want to know about it, I suggest you just go and read that proper job description on our website. There really is plenty to say. All right, without further ado, I bring you Benjamin Todd.
So I hope we'll get to talk about the 80,000 Hours organizational journey over the last 12 years or so, as well as some of the important lessons that we've learned through our various different successes and mistakes. But first, tell me a bit about what you were doing, I suppose, before you got involved with all of this. So I suppose you were at Oxford in 2007-8 or so?
Yeah, so I'd wanted to kind of like do good in some type of vague way for a long time. And going back to, I think, when I was a teenager, one of the earliest things I can remember was somehow I came across the IPCC report, so the summary of like the expert consensus on climate change. I think maybe I was reading these blogs about like the climate debate.
Yeah.
And I read all that and I was just like, whoa, climate change is like totally an important thing. Why is no one doing anything about it? This like makes so much sense. So I made like a summary of the IPCC report as a series of posters and
Okay.
like got them put up on the wall in my school, trying to like hopefully persuade some of the other students to care about climate change as well. And
Yeah.
obviously convince no one.
Okay.
But that was maybe like, you know, one of my first kind of proto EA things I did.
Yeah, I remember just walking around the streets, putting, I think, like negative flyers about huge cars on four-wheel drives in Australia. I think that's one of my like early memories of an extremely like inefficient activity.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that kind of working, though. Maybe it just hardens people against you, like, fuck this guy kind of reaction.
Yeah, I expect it probably doesn't cause people to sell their cars very, very, very often. Okay, so that was kind of high school. What kind of opinions did you develop at university?
Yeah, I mean, I remained pretty kind of climate change focused for a while. And just as I left high school, I did like an environmental audit of my school as well and was saying like we could design the buildings to be like sustainable and like here's how we could have air circulation that didn't require energy input.
Yeah.
You know, like should we get solar panels? And yeah, the result of that was also like the deputy headmaster writing back and saying like, we have started an organic garden.
Okay. Were you happy about that?
Well, no, I mean, the whole report was kind of like, I was quite influenced by David Mackay, I think, by then already. So I was already being like, we need to focus on like the big things.
Right. This is a physicist who wrote this famous book about what is actually causing climate change by the numbers.
Yeah, it's called Sustainability Without the Hot Air. And it's about like, how can we have a plan that actually adds up in reducing our CO2 emissions as much as we need?
Yeah. So the organic garden did not fully satisfy you.
Yeah. And so I think when I then arrived at university, I was like kind of searching for something. So I would go to loads of talks and I guess I got involved with like, I went to the Oxford Radical Forum, which was like super left-wing politics stuff. And I kept on doing climate advocacy stuff a bit. So one day we arranged a thing where we tried to get as many professors to give a lecture relating their subject to climate change. So it was like philosophy of climate change, physics of climate change, economics of climate change. And we got like a bunch of people to, do these, just kind of like trying to spread awareness, not super strategically. But then one of these talks I went to was then Toby Ord, who there was these, every Wednesday, I think, our chaplain at college would have a talk where we'd all sit on the floor and eat like free food. Yeah. And one day I was like sitting on the floor watching Toby and he gave his Taking Charity Seriously talk, which is the one where he kind of, it's the founding talk of Giving What We Can. And he leads you through like, this idea of equality, so like a year of quality, just a year of healthy life, talks about how like the NHS will save qualities for £20,000, $30,000, and gives you this really strong sense of like, wow, this is like a really valuable thing. And then he kind of shows that like, okay, there's things you could do that are 10 times more cost effective than that. And then like 10 times more cost effective than that again. And then if you focus on the very best things, it's like potentially like 1,000 times more cost effective. And he kind of has this series of graphs that just like really delivers this message. And then he's like, okay, and there's like something you can actually do about this. There's the 10% Give What We Can pledge. And I think I got convinced pretty much immediately, but I think about a week after I signed the pledge and I was the first non-founding member. So after the official launch, I was like the first person who kind of like signed on, who wasn't just one of like Toby's friends who had joined beforehand.
Very cool. So did this cause you to immediately kind of shift into effective altruist style work, or did you become kind of a close associate of Toby and friends at that point? Or
yeah, no, I started kind of going to the Giving What We Can events, and I actually did, I guess this would have been quite a bit later, but I ended up like doing my master's thesis with Toby as the supervisor. And I remember him like early on telling me all about like replaceability, and I arranged a series of talks. We had, at one point we experimented with the idea of positive ethics instead of effective altruism. So it was like the ethics of how to do good rather than like not doing bad, which is what like most kind of with the analogy being positive psychology. Because most ethics is about like what you're prohibited from doing rather than what would be good to do. Yeah. In the same way that like most of psychology is about like avoiding mental illness rather than being more flourishing.
Yeah. So this was in 2009.
Yeah, so that kind of would have then gone on for several years from 2009 onwards. So I think 2009 was the official launch of Giving What We Can. So it was like at the launch party of that. And then there was kind of like groups and opportunities to volunteer. I should say I did keep going with climate change stuff for a while through that. And then I think actually my first donation was to the 1010 campaign, which wasn't an EA recommended charity, but it was a advocacy campaign to, I think it was to cut the UK's carbon emissions by 10% by 2010.
Okay. We're getting quite late in the day to achieve that goal, I suppose.
Well, I think the UK might well have succeeded in that goal because we actually the UK's actually halved its carbon emissions per capita in the last 10, 20 years, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember they got a whole 747 plane and then they got it melted down and turned into dog tags, which said 1010 on them. And they gave them out to their donors. So I got this okay. And I was like, that's cool. And then, I was planning to then study the intersection of climate and economics.
Okay.
And so I did a summer project in that intersection. I was really considering doing a PhD in that area. And that was one of my career options.
Okay. So the idea for 80,000 hours itself kind of came together in 2011 at some point. This was all before I was involved, so I actually don't know the story here very well. I know there was some media campaign and some rush to set up the website, but maybe you could talk us through that very early stage.
Yeah, I think it would have been in 2010, so a year after the launch of Give It What We Can. And I was thinking about my career decisions, and we just kind of I guess these ideas, there were all these ideas around earning to give and replaceability had both, I think they'd already been written up by Brian Tomasic on his blog already by then. And so these things were kind of being discussed in the proto-effective altruism community. And then, we just also knew that it was pretty obvious implication from Giving What We Can that if some charities are 1,000 times more cost effective than others, then some career paths are presumably 1,000 times more impactful than others.
Right, yeah.
Just at the very least, by working at a more effective charity rather than a less effective charity, you could increase your impact by 1,000-fold.
Yes, yeah.
And then also the idea of earning to give comes out very naturally. Another thing I was doing was finance, and I was involved with this investing competition around, I can't remember, that was maybe 2010, 2011, and I did 2 internships with Orbis, which was a value investing company. And then so I was I could do earning to give, and I could do the climate, economics, PhD, or maybe something else. And
these were different career paths you were kind of weighing up and trying to figure out which one would be right. Okay,
yeah. So that was that thinking, and then so at one of these Give It What We Can committee meetings, I was I was thinking of giving a talk about which career is highest impact, and Will said, I was thinking of giving the exact same talk.
Yeah.
So we wrote the talk together.
Nice. Okay.
That was, I remember us practicing it in my room in Balliol.
Yeah.
Which is also the college that Toby came from. So it's I think Balliol has a special EA claim.
Hasn't it also produced a ridiculous number of prime ministers?
Oh, well, there's that too. Yeah. Okay. Including Boris. Yeah.
Right.
That's the 4th one.
For better or worse. How did the talk go? Actually, what was in the talk? I suppose you only would have had a few days, I guess, to put this together?
No, we probably put this together over a month or something, just as a side project while we were studying.
Yeah.
So I think that the original first ever talk is on YouTube. And the first section is basically an argument for why earning to give could be much higher impact than working directly in a nonprofit. And Will gave that section, and he also talked about how he'd decided to give away all of his money above, I think it's 20,000 post-tax inflation adjusted.
Yeah.
And then the second half of the talk, which no one remembered, was given by me, but that was where I talked about could there be things even higher impact than earning to give? And I said definitely.
Yeah.
For instance, we talked about government and policy. We talked about how by being a multiplier you could do more, and research as well. I think those were the 4 big paths: earning to give, research, government policy, advocacy. So that would have been February 2011. So it was definitely never about earning to give only, just from the start. But there was just this very memorable first section where we kind of say there's this new path, and it seems maybe better than what people can conventionally think of as ethical careers.
Yeah.
So that was the really sticky bit. Yeah, and then I think Will then went on and gave this talk a lot of different universities.
I see.
But the very first talk was also the most important one because, I guess we've told this story before, but there was maybe 20, 25 people in the audience. And depending on how you count it, maybe 6 of them totally changed their careers. And now 2 of those people work at 8,000 hours now, which is Roman and Habiba.
Yeah.
And then a group of others, which was Richard Batty, Matt Gibb, Robbie Shade. I think it was Richard Batty who came up to Will after and was you should start an organization about this.
Yeah.
And so those 3 and Will and possibly some others I was forgetting, but at least that group of 4 then started what was called High Impact Careers over that summer. So that was February, and then over the next few months, 80,000 Hours was started, or High Impact Careers was started.
Okay, so at that stage it was called High Impact Careers.
Yeah.
Yeah, why was it called that? I suppose it's
Well,
very natural.
Just descriptive.
Yeah, I see. Right.
I mean, that's more of a traditional effect altruism org name, isn't it?
just like
do the really bland, like...
Exact description of what it does. Yeah. The Shrimp Welfare Project, yeah. Would be a classic new example.
You've been going on about shrimp welfare recently. I feel like this is some kind of...
Just a personal passion of mine. Okay, so I know there's at some point you guys did a publicity campaign where you were trying to get in the media, or maybe the media came to you. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I guess the Oxford term, I kind of like was a bit checked out for a few months, but then towards the end of the summer, maybe August, September, I got back involved and then became the CEO, though, I mean, I don't know if that is even my title, but anyway, it was kind of like I was like
you were responsible for it.
Yeah, and so we tried to get lots of people signed up at the Freshers Fair at Oxford. And I think that was actually when we made our kind of like most aggressive promotional materials, where we had like, I think we had maybe a poster of like doctor and a banker being like, who has more impact?
Yeah. And
we also made these little like postcards. So one, which is like loads of stick people on them in different bright colors.
Yeah.
And I think the best one said like, one life saved, you're a hero, or something. 1 million lives saved is a statistic, which is like the reverse of the Stalin quote, right?
I think it is Stalin. Was it? One life is a tragedy, 1 million lives is a statistic. Yeah. I'm just imagining those materials and how much they must have wound people up.
Yeah, so we
reaction?
definitely did get people just coming up and being like, what, like, just really negative about it. I mean, we also got people who were really interested and like, oh, this makes total sense. So there was like a lot of people still signing up. We were giving talks and they were well attended, and people were like saying they were changing their careers. And yeah, I mean, I around that time I hated the name, so we started a process to figure out a new name.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was like, one thing I would say about like every decision to name an org I've been involved with has been super painful. So I recommend avoiding it at all costs. But yeah, we did a bunch of brainstorming, like they all sucked. And then I think the actual suggestion, I think it was this guy called Tom who was kind of helping out really early on. And he suggested 70,000 Hours, which was the opening of a paper Will had written, a philosophy paper, where he lays out the arguments for earning to give, and it starts, the opening line is, you have about 70,000 hours in your career. So he was like, what about 70,000 hours? And I think we pretty much immediately liked that name. So we put it on the list, voted, it won. And then I think I asked a bunch of people, like including like a poetry professor friend.
Okay. Yeah.
And like, is 70,000 hours or 80,000 hours better? And he was like, no, definitely 80,000 hours. Like, it's just the rhythm is so much, like 70,000 hours. It's much harder to say.
80,000.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, it's just the kind of round number is nice.
Totally.
So we like quickly, and we realized that like, I think the maths actually maybe does round up to 80,000 hours. It depends on exactly
which country, at what age you retire.
Yeah. So we did that, and Will then actually edited the philosophy paper to open with, you have 80,000 hours, because
it's going to have to retract it and resubmit. Nice. Okay. Yeah, this is why you've always got to keep a poet around or maintain a diverse friendship group for people with different skills. Okay, so this is, I guess, did you name it in early 2011 or so?
This would have been the autumn of 2011.
2011, okay.
Like October or something.
Yeah. So are we getting up to the publicity campaign and the rush to create a website?
Yeah, so that was November. Yeah, I guess one thing that 8,000 Hours benefited a lot from was giving what we can, kind of having been there and been a few steps ahead of us. So Giving What We Can had got tons of press early by basically being like Oxford academics giving away all their money. The Oxford University press media person had helped them do a press release and helped them get all that coverage. So we were just like, okay, well, let's use the same playbook for 80,000 Hours. So Will had his philosophy paper about earning to give. We were like, this can be a news story. The Oxford University press service might help us promote it.
Yeah.
And like, basically that worked. I mean, I think there might be a story that I don't know all the details of, but like, Neil kind of like made sure he like bumped into the press officer guy like at the pub, and pitched it to him.
This is Neil Bauman, who someone who got involved quite early and
very
now works
early,
at 80,000 hours. Yeah.
No, I mean, Neil did a lot to get like CEA going in the early days.
Yeah,
and had like a ton of hustle, like he'd advised the president of the Maldives on climate change and like set up a think tank while he was a grad student.
Yeah, he had a lot of things on the boil. Okay, so what was the story though for the press here? 'Cause I guess it's clear.
It was basically like the message of this, like earning to give could be higher impact than traditional ethical careers.
Okay.
Just what this philosophy paper was about. It was just like Oxford Academics says like bankers could do more good than charity workers or doctors if if they donate the money. And yeah, I mean that just like really worked, and
the press lapped it up.
Yeah, Will got onto the BBC Radio 4 Today program, which is like pretty much one of the biggest radio shows in the UK. Like a couple of million listeners at least.
Wow, okay. I guess that would have been terrifying at the time.
Yeah.
Used to speaking to rooms with dozens of people.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were definitely like prepping Will a lot. And the way it happened is, I think we got this opportunity and it was like, well, this is like, I think it was going to be a week out. And then something happened. So it was just like 2 days out, because it was kind of like, well, actually, no, we want to like shuffle it around. So it's going to be like Tuesday.
Okay.
And we didn't have a website or anything. So that's when we ended up basically just doing an all-nighter to write and like put up the whole website from scratch. We'd like written a little bit before, but basically like we're a long way from it being up.
And didn't you have an issue? I think that you registered the domain so just before the interview going out that some people couldn't even get there because it hadn't reached the address hadn't reached the DNS servers.
Yeah, I mean, or at least it was launched so last minute.
Yeah.
That, I mean, it takes a while to get ranked in Google.
Right.
So there was people literally searching 80,000 hours and couldn't find us.
Wasn't there yet? Okay, yeah. What stuff was on the website at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, you can probably see that in Web Archive.
Oh God, we shouldn't be encouraging people to go and look there. It's dangerous.
I mean, the very first version, it was like very basic, but I mean, it probably would have had some stuff about just like the arguments for earning to give.
And a link to the paper maybe.
Yeah, and then I think it probably had mini profiles on some of the other high impact careers. Okay. And then I think it might have had a couple of examples of people, like mini user stories.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like a very basic page.
Did this super wind people up? I'm imagining, the whole message has always divided people a lot. The idea that bankers, especially then, this was right after the financial crisis. Yeah. You're like, you're hitching your wagon to the most controversial and hated group in society.
I mean, it definitely did wind people up a bit. And we had a bunch of other media coverage. So there was like I think there was a Wall Street Journal article, and Will maybe went on like something like CNBC.
Okay.
A couple of like pretty big shows just on the back of this. So that did like really get us out there. But yeah, it meant that for years afterwards, we were really associated
this is our
with
original sin.
Yeah.
People. Yeah, I think sometimes people still, even to this day, think that 80,000 hours is about earning to give.
It has become much less.
The
last few years. Yeah, but even well till like 2015, 2016, which I mean was a big cost. I think. I mean, it's written up as a mistake on our mistakes page. I think the strongest case for it being a mistake is just that maybe we could have basically got all those benefits without the costs, because we could have still had earning to give as one of the options, and we could have still given the talk on university campuses.
Yeah.
But we could have slightly toned down the controversy. I think maybe the bigger thing would have just been not doing the media. Like, I think the media just really shapes people's impressions a lot, but doesn't actually generate that many like interested people who are seriously going to do this.
Yeah.
And we could have totally done all of those university talks without having the media coverage.
Yeah, did you suspect that you might regret this at the time? Did anyone realize, in like 8 years, people are going to think we're just about earning to give and we'll have to...
Yeah, well, I think it was more sticky than I expected.
Yeah, okay.
And I think I probably under-anticipated as well, just like... Because our actual message was always more nuanced. I think I just also was over-optimistic about how much people would only remember the simplest possible version.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the thing people were hating was like they didn't even quite get the idea that we were saying that you had to donate like half your income.
Right, okay.
They're just thinking like, like bankers are generally higher impact. Like some people would even misunderstand it on that level.
Wow, okay, yeah. I mean, I suppose that is understandable. The journalist garbles it, and then the person kind of spends 30 seconds just scanning their eyes across an article, and they're like, what the hell is this? Okay, so... Were you at that stage committed to turning the idea into an organization and hiring people and?
No, so that was my 4th year at university.
Okay, yeah.
And so then in this kind of after the media thing, the main thing then we were doing was more talks, and then we started a blog and started to like build up a decent amount of views. Like I think we were getting like thousands of views per post at that point.
Okay, yeah. This was just covering all kinds of different topics related to careers and impact and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we actually talked about, for instance, like a lot of the kind of heuristics and biases stuff and how that could apply to careers. Yeah. And that was like much more new back then. So that did pretty well.
Yeah. That was very in vogue around that time.
Yeah.
I think Kahneman was making a splash.
Well, this would have even been like decently before Thinking Fast and Slow, I think. So like these ideas were just really not well known.
Yeah. 80,000 Hours at some point started kind of pledge to do good with your career, kind of like
I mean exactly. We were just copying Giving What We Can again.
Yeah.
So we had an online community where you could sign up and be like, I pledge to have a high impact career. I think for a while we had a 10% pledge, which is like 10% of time, more money towards doing the most good. And then I think maybe we simplified it to just like, I pledge to like try to lead a high impact career.
Yeah. Did we ever keep a list of all the people who made that pledge? We've got to go back and see who's been naughty and nice.
I mean, it should be possible to get hold of that data somewhere.
Okay, yeah. Talk a bit about how things developed after the media campaign.
So we were doing the blog and I was working on it part-time. And I guess I started to get gradually less motivated by like academics and studying at that point because just like 80,000 hours is more exciting. So I kind of like scraped by my fourth year more. But like just at the minimum I needed to get the grades I wanted. And then I had this big career decision, like should I continue with 80,000 hours after I graduated or do one of the other two options which we mentioned? So that would be like investing and earning to give or academia. And I think I remember we had like these CEA retreats where we'd go out to, it was that weird like kind of castle/school.
The one in Wales?
Yeah, I think
Atlantic
so.
College.
Yeah, Atlantic College. And I remember being back on the train, like talking about it with Will and Neil, like standing in the corridor, like which one I should do.
Yeah.
And I remember talking about it with my parents. Yeah, I was definitely found it a difficult decision, though I think in the end it felt pretty clear that I should do 80,000 hours.
Okay, yeah. That's kind of what everyone was recommending. Do your parents have any preference for you to maybe do something? So you'd be signing up to, I don't know whether there was any money around at the time. The organization didn't exist. EA didn't have a name then, or maybe it had only just the name had been coined. Did your parents have any reservations about?
The name was coined in 2011.
Okay.
And that was part of the process of setting up CEA. So I think CEA would have been existing by then. And then, CEA was like hiring its first 5 staff members.
Yeah.
Who were going to start in like July 2012.
Yeah.
And I ended up being one of those first 5. So they were hiring a bunch of people as well. So it wouldn't have just been like just me doing everything. It was like CEA exists, they're hiring people, there's like a charity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did anyone recommend that you not do this?
Yeah, I don't think so.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, there wouldn't have been I think there were people who would have been like unsure or just didn't want to take a stance. But I don't remember anyone being like, no, this seems like a mistake.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's great that you had people who are willing to encourage you to take a risk. I think very often we're encouraging people to be a bit more entrepreneurial and risk-taking in their careers, and you get a lot of pushback from friends and family who are concerned about someone's well-being or concerned about their status and career prospects in the long term.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think my mother has definitely been concerned about that, but the thing she's been most concerned about is actually the Giving What We Can pledge.
Oh, right.
Because she's like, how will we be able to like afford to live, and like what happens if you have kids, if you're giving 10%? And I don't remember the same thing coming up about the job.
That's so interesting because the job would have...
it's a much bigger sacrifice.
Much bigger sacrifice in terms of salary. Yeah. It's like probably reducing it more by like 80% rather than 10%.
But I think that is a good thing about the Giving What We Can pledges. It seems like a lot to people, but people routinely take careers where they'll earn half as much as another career. And no one's like, oh my God, how could you possibly consider doing that?
Yeah, that is really interesting. I'll have to think
it's
about why it
sometimes
is.
like people just have these in like different reference classes somehow. It's like becoming a teacher is like a normal thing to do, or working for a charity is like a normal thing to do.
But giving 10% is weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though like the first is actually maybe like could easily be a 75% salary.
Yeah, should have more respect for teachers and the salary sacrifice they make, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing now looking back, I could have easily made a mistake on was we didn't really have the idea of career capital at that point. So I was just literally thinking in terms of like which one would be highest impact over the next 5 or 10 years or something like that. And so I was just basically like, 80,000 hours seems higher impact because of the multiplier argument, like could get more than one person something to give if I do this. Another kind of bit of reasoning was like Matt Wage was literally considering like working at CEA to run the Life You Can Save or going to Jane Street. And we kind of realized that like Matt's earnings would be higher than mine, but it seemed like I was a better fit for like entrepreneurial running the thing.
Yeah.
So there was almost this like trade where it was like Matt would go to Jane Street and would be one of the early donors to CEA, which he was, and like basically pay for several staff members.
It was a comparative advantage thing to some degree.
Yeah.
Where, one person could bring home the bacon and other people could then spend the money.
Yeah. But then I think I was kind of lucky that I think I did end up getting better career capital from 80,000 hours than I would have from the other two paths, even though I just wasn't really thinking about it. Where the kind of heuristic is just like, if you can do something like interesting and entrepreneurial, you often get a lot of career capital from that.
Totally. It is so funny that the idea of career capital, this idea of, well, an important thing that you should do early in your career is put yourself in a better position to do things later in your career. Make sure that your career keeps progressing in a sense. Like, how could that not be on our radar? But it's very easy for it not to be. I think, in fact, for most young people, it kind of, they just don't really think about that in concrete terms until it's pointed out. I mean, I guess some do, but...
I think almost also the idea of like having it as a quantity or something, like somehow makes it more possible to somehow reason about it. Because you're kind of like, well, I could be like building like career capital in this path, or I could be having impact, and then I want to like do the thing that lets me get the best of both over the long term.
Yeah.
Somehow that like crystallizes it more than just something very generic like, oh, you should like get skills or something. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I guess because people would have a sense that it's better to be in a job where you might get promoted more or something like that. But then it's hard to integrate that into the decision without making it more precise, exactly all the kinds of career capital and how they might trade off.
Yeah. But then, I mean, the problem with career capital is that then people associate it with just the kind of most obvious credentials. So I think if I'd known about the concept of career capital then, it might have made me more keen to do finance or PhD, because I'd be like, well, that's really clear career capital. But actually, I think I got better career capital from 80,000 hours, so I kind of like was making a double mistake that cancelled out.
Yeah, that's fortuitous. What was the plan for 80,000 hours? I guess we know how things have turned out, but was the vision very different back then?
Well, yeah, like a lot of entrepreneurs, we were just kind of doing like all types of different stuff. We didn't really, we were super unfocused. And
did you think of that as a deliberate decision, or was that's just what happens when you don't make focus your main focus?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to stay focused, even if you're constantly trying. You tend to end up unfocused. But yeah, I think it's maybe very early on, it can be good to just be basically trying a bunch of things and seeing what sticks. And so we were in that phase. But then I knew early on that, so I think that summer I was already like, we need to be more focused. And so one of the decisions we made very early was we were kind of conceiving ourselves almost as like an advocacy campaign or like a moral campaign or something, where we're like, we wanted to spread these ideas in society and just get them out there and convince people of them, which was maybe a bit more like the give what we can kind of model, where it's like giving 10%. It's kind of like this thing the norm we want to promote.
Yeah.
But then like another thing we were doing is kind of like more like careers advice, which was like, I kind of saw that as giving people information to help them have more impact. And we decided to focus on that second paradigm.
So it's more research heavy than advocacy heavy.
Well, not necessarily research, but more the framing trying to be like, people already want to have impact. We're giving them information to help them have more impact, and being like this kind of like supportive, useful resource.
I see.
Rather than like we're out there trying to convince people to give 10% or to do high impact careers or to like take earning to give seriously. So
it's like people already want to reduce their carbon emissions. We just want to inform them more about how to do that best. Is more the model, rather than like beating people over the head to get them to worry more about climate change. Yeah,
which I think is a really good frame for EA as a whole, and that's the one I try to stay within. It's so easy to start thinking like, oh, we need to like convince people, like make people into EAs, like recruit people. But I try to think of it more as like lots of people want to do good.
There's this enormous untapped or there's enormous undertapped potential.
Yeah, and like the existing advice and research is really bad, and like people could just have like 100 times more impact, and they would want to do that.
And then they'll like you for it rather than feel like they're
being battered over.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So the idea was to provide information. What was the initial plan for how to do that? At the time, did you feel like the resources that you had or the advice you had was woefully insufficient?
Well, you know, we had a lot of traction in terms of people actually seeming to say they've like made big changes to their career on the basis of these ideas. So I think we already knew at that point that we had some powerful ideas.
Yeah.
And with what we're actually doing about it, I think I remember being a big proponent of online content from the start. And, you know, I think I kind of tried to convince Give It We Can to like start a blog. And I had this intuition that like, it's more scalable to have online content and you can just build up a following, and that would do more than just giving these in-person talks. But I think, Give It We Can kind of didn't quite bite on that at that time. So then 80,000 hours kind of became more focused on. So that's why I said like one of the first things we did was a blog and starting to build up page rank and following. And so, I think there was an early emphasis on online content, but then we were probably still doing a bunch of talks. And then we would also do one-on-ones with people, especially people who we met at the talks who seemed really interested, but also people who'd come in through the website. So I think maybe very early on, it would have just been like, here's like some articles about our most important ideas and maybe a thing where you could get in touch with us for one-on-one advice.
Right.
And then in practice, we're doing a bunch of talks and stuff as well.
Yeah, maybe is it worth scanning like all of the things that might have been going on? Because this will be, or this like very general issue of how much should you focus? I guess especially early on in a project where you don't know what stuff is going to work. This is just a problem that almost every entrepreneur faces. You start getting your ideas out there, or people hear about you, and then they just start throwing opportunities to do stuff at you in a way that can just make you even like less focused than you were before.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do conversations with people about their career. There's writing the blog, there's doing media, and there's doing talks.
And the website had like a lot of different things because we'd write about like heuristics and biases applied to careers, and we'd have career profiles, and we'd I mean,
and the membership program.
Oh yeah, the membership program, yeah.
And I guess were you getting interns around that time?
Well, I think that was actually when you say being unfocused, the biggest thing that comes to mind for me was like we just hired like loads of interns.
Right.
I think that summer we maybe had like 3 or 4 interns.
Yeah.
And they wanted a lot of autonomy over what they were doing. So I think one person was writing this long report about why moral philosophy could be a really high impact career path.
Is that Nabel?
Yeah.
I remember that.
We actually ended up like never even publishing it, but we put like a lot of work into it. The basic argument being something like, just Peter Singer alone has saved so many lives that if you divide that through by the number of moral philosophers,
they're good on average.
Yeah.
That's clever.
But even if you take like the whole rest of philosophy as being like zero value.
Yeah. We got to go away and find that on Drive. Or maybe that's on Dropbox. Maybe that didn't even make it onto Google Drive.
That should be recoverable. Yeah, and then like Ilan, who was then like really into animal advocacy, and he actually spent his internship basically setting up ACE.
Yeah, Animal Charity Evaluators now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, was it called that at the time? Or
I think it had a different name. I'm struggling to remember.
But it was kind of just like 80,000 hours, but for effective animal advocacy.
Yeah. Okay.
And then turned into ACE later.
Yeah, and I think there were some other interns as well doing their own thing.
Well, so Jess was an intern and did lots of great writing for the blog.
Jess Woodstone. Yeah, people could find her early articles. I think they hold up impressively well.
Yeah. So I guess of the 3, she was the one who was kind of like actually delivering on a core program. And the others were kind of just doing the ACE thing, that's like a good example of being super unfocused.
Yeah. I suppose at the time, I suppose after 6 months or a year of that, it did become apparent that we were both mentally and physically as a group like incredibly scattered.
I think it maybe took even less time than that because I think the internships were mostly in the summer, and I think already by the end we basically started cutting down on the number of interns a lot.
Yes. But it is interesting how many amazing people came out of the woodwork and came to do internships at that point. So many people who are still involved in accomplishing great stuff today. I wonder whether it might actually have been a good program because it was like a way of people who were already so excited about this idea that even though it was incredibly undeveloped, they were willing to travel from the US or travel from Canada or whatever, just to come and hang out with people for no money, organizing their own accommodation.
I think maybe we gave people like small travel grants or something. But
right. So it was kind of a summer camp for people who were already really stoked about these ideas, who were maybe also quite entrepreneurial potentially and were willing to go off and do really exciting stuff, and many of them did. But I suppose at some point you do also have to actually focus on the main project.
I think there's a good argument to be made along those lines, but then I think what you want to do is optimize the thing around that benefit.
Right.
So maybe
there could have been an internship org.
Yeah, or maybe you just do a much shorter thing, which is like 2 weeks, and you just get everyone to come to Oxford at the same time.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And you just really try to optimize for like meeting everyone, working together, hanging out, helping people with their career plans, like whatever they want.
Yeah.
With the idea of like getting people to do stuff later. Whereas instead of you're kind of like, no, we're like trying to build this org and then we're trying to kind of like shoehorn people into it, but they have other stuff they're motivated by, and then you end up kind of starting a bunch of random projects to like give them work.
Yeah.
That's like really slowing you down on your main priority.
Yeah. Let's talk for a little bit about just what was the general vibe in the EA community in the UK, and I guess specifically Oxford around that time. It was very different. I suppose people have talked about parts of this here and there over the years, but the accommodation, like the office setup, the salaries, just everything felt really duct taped together, and I guess quite fragile, and definitely not necessarily conducive to people being maximally productive. I guess, should we talk about the housing situation first?
Yeah, I mean, I guess initially, I think like at least for 80,000 hours, I think Will fundraised maybe like $50 to $100K. I think that was mostly maybe from Jeff Kaufman and Julia Wise. I think they were some of the first donors to CEA.
Yeah.
And then Matt Wargay also started donating early, but it wasn't much. So initially the salary was about £15,000.
I think that was about the legal minimum that one could pay for a full-time staff member.
Yeah, close to minimum wage. I think after a year or two, we increased it to like the low 20s, but like that wasn't much. And like for that reason, we put a lot of work actually into finding like cheap housing.
Yeah.
And I got really lucky, and I found this guy who, well, his business card was like historian, art critic, priest. And he was just this guy who like had this house in Oxford, and he would rent it to grad students kind of as on a non-for-profit basis. So it was £500 a month for a 2-bedroom house. And by like living there, that really made a big difference to being able to live on such a low salary for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And I mean, I actually mostly worked from home because our office was like so bad that that's how I got around it. But yeah, like the very first office we had was just like a balcony in an Oxford College dining hall. So it would kind of like, it was totally open to the dining hall. So every lunch it would be, and dinner time, it would be super noisy because there'd be like loads of, like 200 people all eating below us.
While you're trying to work.
Yeah. I think that was like mostly just for the summer. And then I think we just had a bit where we just didn't have an office. So we worked out of like the canteen in a library for at least 3 months or something.
Yeah.
And then it was only after that we moved into this tiny room at the back of an estate agent off in St. Clement's in Oxford.
Yeah, that's the progression that I remember. I think the day I showed up, some people were working in this room above a cafe that they'd managed to get them to let them hang out in for a while. And then it was, on this row above a dining hall. And then I think soon after that we didn't even have that. So then we were just in a general library area in some college somewhere, just sitting on tables that happened to be there.
Well, I think that was the social sciences library.
Yeah, the social sciences library, right. And then after a while, we managed to get this maybe worse spot. This place out the back of real estate agent. We'll stick up some photos to what that was like. But people were...
You'd have to walk past these real estate agents just to get into the office.
We must have driven them insane because
there was a lot of people out the back. Yeah.
Yeah, all of these like young interns, people who've flown in from all around the world, just constantly walking through this estate agent. Because it was basically just like their back room that for some reason they were renting out.
Yeah, like one of our early donors came when we gave him a tour, and when he like came into the office, his first reaction was, is this legal?
Yeah. I doubt it.
Because there's kind of like 10 people or like 8 people in this tiny room, and then we had him like a meeting space, but that was where the ceiling was so low that you couldn't stand up.
Yeah.
That was the meeting room.
And it was incredibly poorly lit as well. I'm not sure that had external... I'm not sure what the ventilation was.
Well, just windows.
It had windows? Okay.
Yeah, the main room had windows, yeah.
Okay.
But like just, you were saying you showed up, and I remember, so that would have been September.
Yeah.
And I think... Yeah, Rob, like, I think when you showed up, you were saying you didn't know where you were staying.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You just came and you just had a single suitcase and a suit, which I guess you didn't wear because we didn't wear suits.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I think at the time that I was landing, there was still an email thread going on debating where I should live, where I should be allocated.
And then you ended up in the famous Gams house.
I ended up in this...
Which I guess was another, like, kind of landlord who... almost like helped EA get going because so many people lived it.
So many people lived in this house. It was kind of the landing place, I guess, for many people who first arrived in Oxford. Ken's a lovely guy. The house did have some issues, though. I remember very early on when I got there, the shower, like the ground floor toilet was completely unusable because the shower was just like dripping through. And so the room had become incredibly like wet and moldy, and the shower, like we couldn't really use the shower properly. So I think people were like going elsewhere in order to have showers. One of the rooms was like not really a normal room. I think it was kind of a converted storage facility. We were cramming people in. Anyway, we were poor, but we legitimately did have a great time in the house. A bunch of us who had just gotten there because it was just such an exciting new era.
Yeah, and like there was a lot of people passing through, like not just the interns, but just kind of, we'd have these retreats and people would come from all over the world who were interested in these ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing about the early days is like, I think it did just feel really clear that it's like, these ideas are really important. And that was just super motivating. So there was this real sense of like, almost just not questioning the situation, just being like, well, we have to do this.
Exactly,
I had a lot of that sense.
Yeah, it's not like I ever considered leaving.
Yeah.
I know what I was getting myself into. So yeah, something that is interesting is there was such a diversity of opinion then. It was a much smaller group, but just people were all across the board on what kind of problems they thought were most important, what concepts they were particularly interested in. But everyone knew, and I think it's been shown to be the case, that there was just thinking in this way, thinking in expected value terms, trying to figure out like how you can do the most to help other people, was just a massively underexplored area. And as soon as you started looking there, you just found all of these you had all of these great insights, and you didn't know exactly where it was going to lead or how it was going to congeal. But I think we were right to be really excited that we'd found just such a fertile area for intellectual exploration and advocacy.
Yeah, though, I mean, a bit of the story that people find interesting, slightly going in the opposite direction, is like, 80,000 hours is one of the reasons why we started it was to have an org that would focus on existential risk and could have that prominently among what it did.
Okay.
Whereas we thought like early giving what we can should remain more focused on, maybe you could still like give to X risk things as part of your pledge, but that wouldn't really be the first thing we talk about. And yeah, so that means that even back in like 2012, there was a group of us, like I remember Neil as well was very keen on like, we should really be doing something about existential risk right back then.
Yeah, I just remember people had very heated discussions about long-termism and existential risk and whether that stuff made sense. It was a very controversial topic among people who are interested in these ideas. And there were lots of people who would very strongly advocate for a more GiveWell-focused view. Just similar conversations to what we have now, although I think much less developed, or the ideas were a lot more scattershot. Yeah, so there was a group of us who were very excited about existential risks, but at the time there were people who were extremely excited about animal stuff, people who were extremely excited about GiveWell, people were excited about other aspects of global health and development. There were people who thought it was radically important that we immediately try to grow the movement as much as possible because of this kind of multiplier argument that, and admittedly, it was growing at a very rapid percentage pace at that point. So people had very strong views about all kinds of different topics, and yet somehow we did manage to get along and produce something useful out of it.
One other example of a debate we had then was just, should we talk about effective altruism directly? Because early on, we just conceived of it as an internal facing name, just to name CEA the org. And then it kind of started to catch on. But like, even then, there was this proposal that we got into this like pretty heated debate about to start a group of just EA first local groups around the world. So it was called Think, so the High Impact Network, I think.
Yeah.
And like, I was like a big person on the side against that because I was like, well, firstly, the idea was that people who like weren't in the community yet would be given a bunch of material so they could present the like material themselves. So it's kind of like do-it-yourself local group materials. And I was like, this is going to produce like low-quality events, which I think was kind of indicated. It's like better to focus on high-quality online content that you can make sure is really good rather than having like lots of like badly done groups. But then I was also like, EA is too abstract to promote directly, which I think like in some ways, I think kind of is true. And I think a huge problem that EA has had over the last 10 years is people just understand it as like particular list of like, you should do these actions, such as donate 10%, malaria charities, RCT back to charity, or like crazy AI stuff. And like EA just gets identified as like the list of recommendations rather than the way of thinking that it actually is. And that's because like communicating a way of thinking is a super abstract thing. And
it takes a lot longer.
Yeah. So, you know, I think I was like kind of right about that being a big downside, but looking back, maybe actually we kind of realized that EA was the thing taking off fairly early. And so I can't remember which year this was, but maybe 2013, 2014, CEA started Effective Altruism Outreach, which is another new project whose aim was just to promote EA directly. But then, you know, we kept on with Give What We Can because we just thought like, it's too abstract. Give What We Can is a much more concrete thing. And again, like 80,000 hours, it's like high impact careers. That's kind of an existing thing that we can hang everything on. But I think maybe a mistake I made was like not updating even quicker to EA being the central thing. And like now looking back, it's a bit odd that in a sense, like CEA ended up without a kind of content team writing about effective altruism, and all the kind of writery capacity ended up on 80,000 hours writing about high impact careers.
Yeah, it is really interesting that there never really was an attempt to create a research team that would work on EA specific, or EA other than being through either the vehicle of careers or giving. I guess, so you had GiveWell working on a particular kind of giving.
That kind of became Global Priorities.
I see.
So there was a Global Priorities project, which was another early CEA thing. And like, again, clearly like CEA, we set up way too many charities, I think, looking back. Like every good person we had would end up kind of running their own thing. Whereas I think it's like often a lot better to just have like 3 amazing co-founders do one thing and like grow that as much as it can and then move on to the new thing rather than kind of spread out over lots of different projects.
Yeah.
But yeah, we set up the Global Priorities project, which did then eventually turn into the Global Priorities Institute, or was like an influence on that, which is now really successful.
Yeah, which is now a big deal and is an actual institute at Oxford with lots of academics tackling these questions and with a level of rigor that we never could have possibly brought to the table in 2013.
Yeah, though interestingly, it ended up so far has mainly focused on long-termism rather than central EA stuff itself. So a lot of the most central EA things, like how much do interventions differ in effectiveness, like how should we correct for regression to the mean, even like how much do causes differ in effectiveness, like very central EA questions, or even just like how do we compare causes beyond INT, like that actually hasn't really had any much rigorous research done on it.
That's so true. I guess that slightly falls within our remit to a degree, and I guess
Well,
Open
but
Phil
we
has
don't have
ended
a
up doing...
research team either.
No, right, exactly, yeah. But I'm thinking, if people were looking from the outside, who would they say should do this? Maybe they would have thought we maybe should be doing it. Perhaps they thought that Open Phil should be doing it.
I mean, I'm still optimistic that GPI will end up with kind of EA Foundation's research stream as well as the long-termism stream.
Yeah.
But I don't know what their current plans are on that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a bit about the vibe and the conditions that people were living with in Oxford back then. How did the plan for what 80,000 hours would do and what we were going to recommend kind of develop over time?
One thing is, now looking back, quite striking is I think very early we kind of converged on this idea of like online content plus one-on-one. And I kind of still see that now as the core of 80,000 hours today. And I remember, I think I saw this, read this business strategy that I wrote in 2013 when we were doing fundraising.
Yeah.
And I actually thought it's like really holds up. It's like pretty similar to our strategy now.
Yeah.
In fact, in some ways it was like more punchy than like recent documents. I was like, oh, this is like pretty compelling.
Yeah, just copy and paste that into the 2022 plan.
Yeah, so I guess I almost don't know what the lesson is from that. But like, in a sense, we did hit on the thing, but then we kind of had still quite a lot of self-doubt. So in a way, we didn't actually double down on that. In fact, even until it's only really been 2020 when we just became really confident on doubling down on just fully scaling up the one-on-one advice.
Yeah, what were we uncertain about and what were we having self-doubt about back in that
Well,
time?
in the first few years, it was just like, is this going to be cost effective? Like, can we really change people's plans? Not just through like Will talking to them one-on-one, but kind of like as an org.
Yeah.
And yeah, we basically had this list of people who said they'd been influenced by us and seemed cool. Like, in reality, we had pretty, like, these are super messy counterfactuals, so you could have really debated all those cases. And then there was a kind of just also, like, what actually is our advice going to be? And, figuring out things like career capital and, like, when do we say that? And the kind of overall framework is pretty hard to figure out. And, like, for instance, like, Holden just recently has criticized us for, like, he's kind of proposed an alternative framework, which is like, okay, is your worldview the most important century? If so, then just figure out your aptitude from this list of 10 aptitudes and frame it more in terms of like, what could you be amazing at? Whereas 80,000 hours tends to be a little bit more like, okay, what are the most important problems? What are the best things to do about them? And then how could you kind of target those in a career path over the long term?
Yeah, I see.
Things like just how do you compare careers? What are the concepts that we use? Like, do we use career capital, neglectedness, problem selection, all these concepts? So there was kind of like that being solidified. And then I guess just a bit of like, can we actually kind of deliver these programs? But then, yeah, like around 2015, we decided that we'd kind of done that stage. And that's when we started trying to get into Y Combinator. We applied to Y Combinator twice. So I think maybe the first application was in 2014.
Yeah.
And we got turned down. But then we were kind of like, we had some discussions with YC partners that were super helpful. And actually, especially Kate Courteau, who was the nonprofit partner, kind of like we stayed in touch with her and we figured out like what would be needed to get into YC, like what would we need to do. And then by summer 2015, we got in. And so we kind of saw that symbolically as like, we now think we have like a working model. People will actually change careers. We have some advice. That's the stuff we're going to say. And we're like delivering this. And now we can like scale that up a bunch more.
Yeah. How did you first get excited about Y Combinator and the tech scene and all of that?
Well, they started taking, I think the first ever nonprofit was in, maybe it was 2013, 2014. So that was WotC.
Yeah.
And then they like did a batch where they kind of had an official call for nonprofits. And I think that got passed to us by more than one person, just being like, this might be a good fit for you.
Yeah, I see.
And then, well, one thing I did was then like watch a bunch of theirs, like read Paul Graham's essays. They had this great like how to start a startup series of YouTube videos that I found super useful.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of convinced that this would be really useful. And so then I was saying like, it was almost like a year-long project to get in after we like applied, and then had to kind of like figure out what is the core of what we're doing. How can we show that it's really scalable?
Yeah.
How can we have like a founding team that's convincing enough?
Yeah. What was the hiring philosophy then? 'Cause I guess 80,000 hours has hired reasonably slowly. Did that begin at a particular time?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when I knew that having a really high bar for hiring was important pretty early. And so we were definitely hiring slowly from early, like especially once we stopped the internship program, then I think we hired Roman. And then it would have just been like me and Roman as the only full-time employees just on 80,000 hours.
Yeah.
I think for a while
until
Peter Hartree joined.
Yeah.
So we were definitely going pretty slowly. But then that was one of the big things I learned from YC was like they made me way less keen on hiring. And that was like one of the things that really surprised us about it, was just they were like, basically their philosophy is like, before you have product market fit, just don't hire. And then once you have product market fit, maybe then you like hire as quickly as possible. But this is kind of like two regimes thing.
Yeah.
And the argument was like, before you have product market fit, the most important thing is getting to product market fit. Hiring people will actually slow you down, because it basically then means you're spending all your time on management rather than figuring out product market fit, which is usually something that only the founders are really good at.
Yeah.
And so you can easily like grind to a halt while at the same time you've like 5x your expenses. So you've like got now only 20% as much time to figure out product market fit before you're done.
Right.
And that's like a really big failure mode for a lot of startups.
I guess you can also end up hiring people who are specialized in doing something that you're going to decide you don't want to do very quickly because you're trying to figure out what the product even is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another big thing, is just like in a startup, you just want a small, very generally competent, well-coordinated team who can like easily switch between things.
Yeah.
And that kind of, in a sense, that means you need to hold a very high bar on those dimensions. And I think that's also, I don't know, it's just so easy to, I think there's actually like a lot of mistakes in this area. And I see this with a lot of young entrepreneurs or like young people getting into the community. There's just this very like, it almost seems so obvious that like, if you hire more people, you will get more done. And also there's this very compelling illusion that like, I should be able to get money, pay for services, and people will like do the things that I want and pay for. And there should be like experts in things like management and like marketing and running orgs. And like the way to do a lot of stuff is to hire a bunch of these experts in these things and get them to like do these things.
Yeah.
And that just almost seems to just not how things work in the real world.
Yeah. It's a bit surprising. Even
it is
now,
surprising, yeah.
When you say, yeah, it isn't like that. So the idea that you're someone who thinks, you know, I have good ideas about effective altruism and I want to write those up and share them, but I'll hire someone else to manage the project, or I'll hire someone who's an expert in operations. It's surprisingly, shockingly hard to just delegate all of that stuff at an early stage.
Yeah, and I'm kind of worried that I'm not really going to convince anyone, because it's almost still like quite hard to say exactly what goes wrong. But
yeah,
I think one big thing that goes wrong, and this is going to sound very arrogant, but just like there's kind of general level of like professionals doing stuff, like most things are just done badly in the world.
Yeah, or people model through it with a like tolerable level of goodness.
Yeah. So like, you know, something like your bookkeeping is on the end of things that's relatively easy to outsource, because that's a very like well-defined thing that there's people who are out there and they do bookkeeping. But we've found it really hard to not have our books be like totally fucked up by people we've hired to do bookkeeping. Yeah,
that is a really, I mean, I think probably we got to accept some of the blame there, but I mean, but that speaks to the fact that you're part of the process of delegating the thing, of like defining the task and passing and like deciding who's going to do it. And if you don't know how to do that, then you're going to mess that up.
No, I think that's a really big part of it, is like it's very hard to hire someone to do something that you don't know how to do.
Yeah.
And that's because like you can't even judge how good the person is, and it's very hard for you to package things well in a form that's like easy to delegate if you like it's just like a mystery to you.
Yeah.
So that's just early on. It's just really good to just do all the stuff yourself for a while until you at least learn like basic, like very rough outlines of how it works.
Yeah. I think that might even be true of bookkeeping potentially. Like you want to like set up the basic structure of the bookkeeping so that it makes sense given what you're trying to do.
I mean, I think that's kind of what happened in the end, is just like people at CEA did a lot of the like setting up financial systems ourselves.
Yeah.
And like now we have it kind of semi-outsourced, but that like was a thing that took several years of figuring things out ourselves, and then like finding good people, like overseeing them well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember like you've definitely kind of like unfucked 80Ks books on more than one occasion.
Yeah, well, I mean, and imagining someone doing it, well, that's a great example where, so it's bizarre how involved I was in the finances of 80,000 hours and until very recently. It's because I was working on the operations before for the broader organization before I came to work at 80,000 hours.
Well, but you're also just very good at spreadsheets.
Okay, right. Yeah.
You just like spot more mistakes than most people.
Yeah, it is true that it can be remarkably challenging to make a budget in a spreadsheet without introducing massive mathematical errors that if you don't know how those can appear, then you can just end up with completely wrong numbers and report wrong numbers. And I've seen that happening all the time. You have to be remarkably careful. And another amazing thing is whenever I would try to get someone else to handle it, if they weren't deeply embedded within 80,000 hours, then they wouldn't notice that particular line items make no sense, because like, how could we have spent this much money on that? Because that doesn't even exist. When you're inside a project, you understand the budget and the finances just intuitively by scanning them. You spot the errors and you can see how it should roughly be organized. But as soon as you delegate it to someone who's not in the office with you, chaos begins. Yeah.
No, I think that's another really good example of why like having a small, super dedicated, super hardworking, generally competent team, like 4 people, it's really possible to achieve like what would take like 20 or 30 people otherwise. And it's for these types of factors, like you're saying, like if they're all deeply immersed in it, really care, they're going to just like spot way more mistakes. They're going to just intuitively know what's going on. It's going to be really easy for them to coordinate because they're all just kind of like living it every day, and they can like learn things really fast and like pivot strategy really fast. And all these factors add up to just potentially making it like way more productive.
Yeah, you have so much more context and a lot more trust potentially. And willingness to change.
Yeah. And so eventually you have to kind of do the big org route where you hire specialists and you have everything like processified and there's like more bureaucracy. And that's kind of necessary if you want to get to a certain level of scale often. But you kind of want to avoid that as long as possible. And yeah, the way to do that is to have like a small, really talented team who are just doing everything themselves. Yeah. And then only gradually outsourcing things or hiring people to do things once it's like super solidified, you know how it works. It's definitely going to be part of the business in the long term. You're not just going to like pivot away from it.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, I suppose, various different programs or aspects of 80,000 hours that had to be shut down over the years. And I guess some of them have subsequently been resurrected. But during that kind of 2012 to 2015 period, what were some of the things that got started that then had to also be closed?
Well, yeah, we did kind of gradually become more focused over those few years. And one example of that was, I think we'd already mentioned we had this careers pledge that you could take. And that was actually attached to like a mini social network. So it had like profiles of each person, like with bio information. So you could like be part of this community of people doing high impact careers.
Yeah.
And I think there was like a login to the sites for that and all that kind of stuff. And we hired Ozzy Goon, who I think was working with 80,000 hours for almost a year maybe, but yeah, quite a while. And anyway, he basically convinced us that like, you know, it would be almost most of his time just to keep this thing like working well and like debugging it and fixing things and like making marginal improvements. And kind of like had this whole presentation about technical debt.
I see.
And his proposal was like, this isn't the key focus. Let's just shut it down. And this will save a lot of time.
Yeah.
And enable you to just focus on the key thing, which was like the online content.
Yeah. Were you skeptical of that at the time?
I definitely took some convincing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did it. And I think he was vindicated. By that, yeah.
It's very counterintuitive because you think all we're doing is keeping a list of names of people who've signed a pledge. How can this take one full-time coder just to keep it working?
Yeah, I mean, and also the whole rest of the website.
Okay.
No, I mean, and it was a bit more than a list of names. Like I was saying, it was almost like a mini 80K internal social network, you know, with profile functionality and
right. I see.
Like search and commenting and
Okay. But that turned out to be somewhat technically complicated, and I guess we didn't have that many great web devs at the time. So
that
was chewing up.
This is one of the hardest things to hire for the whole time has been engineers.
So we just ended up axing the membership thing. Did we get pushback from people who didn't want us to get rid of that?
Maybe a bit, but yeah, I don't remember there being a ton.
Not being a big issue.
Yeah, I do think something like having a like I pledge to have a high impact career thing you can sign up for. I think that is like a pretty good idea, and I remember. Like a few years later, Kevin Hale at YC being like, oh, you should like totally have something like this. And there could have been a much more minimal version of it that's more just like a list of names.
Yeah.
Or like when you sign up to the newsletter, it's like, do you want to take the pledge? Something like that, which, yeah. So maybe we should have recaptured that thing. But like, I think having the kind of whole like, I mean, another big thing we realized is just like, if you want to have a social network of people, like just use a social network. So,
I see, right.
You know, we set up the 80,000 hours LinkedIn group and that's got over 20,000 members.
Yeah.
And that's kind of got all the functionality that we'd want and a bunch more like super detailed profiles that people actually keep up to date. Because if you try and do your own one, they never stay up to date.
Of course.
You do it once and then like 3 years later, it's all out of date.
Yeah.
And LinkedIn have like slightly changed some of their features now, but you can, if you have a premium account, you can search that group by lots of different fields. So you can do like much more than what you could have done with our stuff with it.
Yeah, that's wildly more useful than a list of kind of people's bios that are going to just year by year become like more and more out of date, such that you have to go look them up somewhere else anyway to figure out who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember there was another project that designed kind of its own internal forum, I think, or maybe even coding it almost from scratch. And then, of course, it was really, I guess, maybe it's hard to think back, but social media maybe was not as much, or it wasn't quite as established exactly where people were going to end up on social media back in those early days.
Yeah, and forums were a much bigger thing.
Forums were still quite a big thing. Yeah, so it felt somewhat natural to code up and produce a forum for people to discuss various topics. But it was surprisingly challenged to code up your own custom forum.
Wasn't there a Giving What We Can forum?
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. And then I think as soon as the discussion moved on to a social media platform like Facebook, some Facebook group, I think the amount of discussion went up substantially, and it was obviously a lot more easy to maintain and moderate. So yeah, I guess if you could hijack an existing...
the early EA Facebook group was pretty terrible.
Yeah, the early...
So it wasn't like a panacea.
No, I think the Give What We Can one was properly moderated, and only people were only allowed in if they'd signed the pledge and so on. So
the Give What We Can Facebook group was better.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. What are some other stuff that had to get the axe?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of kind of like whole programs, I think that was, and then like the internship, kind of just doing like random projects, and that was probably the main thing. I mean, then just maybe there was a process of focusing the content down more, trying to have like a core career guide and a list of careers and a list of courses, and just like figuring out that's the thing, the most important thing we're going to focus on. Whereas like early on we had more of this model of just like, we'll just write blogs about whatever's interesting type approach, which I think like is an interesting alternative model, which I kind of call that the magazine model. And like looking back, that's actually much more scalable because you can kind of almost hire or you can have lots of freelancers or just let people write about a loose collection of topics, and you just play the role of an editor.
So it kind of works in progress is doing this now in a way.
Exactly. And you can see they've like put together a really good thing, like very fast.
Yeah. And they have such a broad remit because you can talk about kind of any aspect of social progress or technological progress. And like ways the world could be better.
Yeah, whereas, so we chose to take this pretty different route, which is more like, here's the key things we want to say about impactful careers. And that's super hard to hire for, because if you write anything, it has to be kind of talking for the whole org, fitting into one of the key things, like that's kind of key gaps in the overall advice. So you just need like way more context and be able to like speak in the org's voice, basically.
Yeah. The downside of the blog post model is just that at the end of the day, you end up with a whole lot of...
Yeah, there's no actual advice.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just here's a bunch of ideas. Though, yeah, some people say that's better from a kind of epistemics point of view, because it's getting people to think for themselves. Because it's really like, no one agrees, like, here's just ideas.
Yeah, realistically, it's all a mess, and, and the blog will reflect that.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
Well, and the podcast more takes this model, right? Like,
exactly,
it's more just like, here's people's views on these topics, listen to a bunch and make up your own mind.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I guess it is kind of like a verbal blog in an odd way. I guess the problem with lots of blogs is that people end up reading none of the old posts except for a handful that for some reason become incredibly popular. So like 95% of it is a ghost town.
Yeah, that's a big thing, because our central content just gets a lot of views. We quickly realized that in order to get significant views, a thing either needs to get like a huge spike on social media, or to get search traffic, or to be like one of the 10 most central pages that you link to.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other stuff just goes nowhere.
Yeah, it is interesting that I feel it's more common for people to find a podcast like this and subscribe to it and then go back and listen to a substantial fraction of the old interviews than it is for someone to find a blog and then just go and read the blog from its beginning forward.
Yeah, I would have guessed those are about similar.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because I thought doesn't only half of the listening time each week come from like the old episodes? Like I think on a blog the ratio would be higher. Like more would be coming from the back catalogue. Though it would depend on whether you're getting search traffic or not.
I think it's more often search traffic to specific old blog posts. I don't know why, but
not browsing back.
But I think it's hard to have the discipline to like, let's go to the archives. I'm going to read like through like I'm reading a journal from start to end. Whereas I think that does happen for some reason, and I've done that with podcasts where I'm like, this is so great. I'm just going to listen from episode 1 forward.
That's interesting.
Could be just that it's easier to avoid distraction when you're listening to audio because you don't have the whole of the internet at your fingertips. Anyway, I guess
there was also some programs that we like considered starting but didn't.
Okay,
Where like one that sticks out is, I think when Peter Hartree first started, his proposal was that he would help us start a podcast and would like do all the audio for it. And I think that would have been back in 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
And we didn't go for that idea, but I mean that one could have been a mistake, because if we had got started like more than 3 years early on the podcast, we would have just got a lot more subscribers because of sheer time passing by. Yeah. And it would have helped with this big gap we had in the community where there was always this big lag between things being written up and the actual state of the art knowledge. Yeah. And the podcast has helped to close that a lot, because it's so much easier just to interview someone for 2 hours than to kind of write up like full like considered articles about all of these positions.
Yeah, I think that probably was a mistake, because that would have been 4 years earlier, and it would have meant that we would have had probably a really good interview show at the point where podcasts were beginning to achieve mainstream success. We would have been more at the Econ Talk level in terms of prominence. And yes, so much better to communicate all of these ideas that were just kind of stuck in people's heads in private conversations for so many years until finally they've seen the light of day through various different means. But there was another, I think maybe it was in 2014 or 15 that again, people got excited by the idea of starting a podcast. And then it just kind of went away. I think there was never really an active decision not to do it. It's just people were too busy with other stuff.
Well, but because I do think on the other side, we've generally had too many programs and been too unfocused.
Yeah.
And so just having even more, I'm not sure would have been the right call. But yeah, maybe there's a bigger picture, long-term division between one vision of 80K as like an online content organization that has like articles, podcasts, maybe YouTube.
Yeah.
And then there's like the one-on-one advice, which has like headhunting and talking to people and maybe talks in local groups. So the more like in-person stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that those like styles of org are actually pretty different. Like if you almost like on a very kind of basic level, like the cost structure, like one is a high marginal cost thing where it's like, in order to have more impact, you need to hire more people and talk to more people. So kind of linear costs. Whereas the online content model is more of like a kind of hits based thing where if it does something does really well, you get like tons of views and without any increase in costs.
Yeah, and I guess culturally it would probably be pretty different as well. It's the difference between running, a literary magazine and some sort of sales operation.
Yeah, well, I would say like consultancy or something.
Yeah.
Because the other one is kind of like hits-based, kind of creativity-driven. You never quite know what your next big thing is going to be that will like drive all your traffic. And you're following all these metrics like kind of views and stuff like that. And I think that's a pretty different culture from like, okay, this year we're going to do 1,000 calls, and next year we're going to do 2,000 calls.
And you're really trying to hone your process on this thing that you're doing every day, trying to figure out how can you deliver a better service.
Yeah, I mean, they do overlap in the sense that the advisors need to understand the cutting edge of the research as well. So that's the kind of, the thing that unites them is just this like underlying understanding of high impact careers.
Yeah. Maybe a final discussion of when we tried to get more focus is that the one-on-one advice, the kind of coaching, advising side of things was kind of suspended when you got into Y Combinator. Yeah, do you want to explain why that was?
Yeah, I mean, Y Combinator got us even more keen on focus. And that like really just, like startups, just they only have one program and the idea is to grow that exponentially until you're a like multi-billion-dollar company. And then maybe you start another program after that. And so that was the paradigm. And I think that makes a ton of sense. It's really hard to get anything to succeed on a big scale. And so you don't want to, like, as a team of like 4 or 5 people, you don't want to split across like 2 or 3 things. You just need to like find the best thing.
And hammer it.
Hammer it as much as you can. And if that's not working, switch to something else.
Yeah.
And we decided at that point that the online content was the thing with the most upside, just almost for the kind of obvious reasons of just being super scalable. Like a team of 4 people could, in theory, get millions of readers.
Yeah.
And change loads of careers, get lots of people involved. So yeah, we'd only been advising maybe like 200 people a year. And I think there's a kind of argument for doing that just to be like speaking to your users. So you could have that as a kind of thing that you're not going to scale. But I think even then it would be better to just optimize around talking to users and then just be like, no, the online content is our program, but we speak to users because it helps the online content. And yeah, we focused like that in YC, and I think that actually went really well. And like you can see in our metrics that from 2014 to about 2017, we grew most of our main metrics like tenfold. So the web traffic went from, like 100K a year to like 1.5 million-ish per year.
That was an era when the focus really was on the website and the web metrics and content, emailing people and so on. And yeah, that definitely paid dividends on that stream.
Yeah, so we had things like the career quiz, which got like a ton of people to sign up. And then eventually this developed into the career guide, which was this kind of central 12 or so articles. And many of those were like very shareable articles. So they would each generate a hit. And then we like promoted the career guide as a package and as a book and did a whole like book promotion campaign around it. So we just had all these ideas and they were all like paid off in terms of firstly getting a spike when they were first released, but then also building up a library of content that was getting a lot of search traffic, because we knew that there was lots of people on the internet searching terms like careers that make a difference and like world's biggest problems and like what skills are valuable and stuff like this. And we ended up having articles that rank near the top of Google in a lot of these questions. I mean, yeah, if you now search like what are the world's biggest problems, 80,000 hours is often in the top 3 results. And I think that's like 10,000 views a month or something from that search term.
Yeah.
And this is where like most of our, like we have this like base of traffic that just still comes from, or new readers coming from that even today, all back from that investment. And I think that would be one of our biggest successes, was like focusing on this kind of content that gets lots of search traffic. And I think that's kind of why 80,000 hours has become the biggest pathway, the kind of biggest single pathway into effective altruism, arguably, because just there is this really big general interest in high impact careers out there. And we're able to just put these like things up that find people who have that interest and get them in.
Okay, we need to leave that there for now, but we will be back to do another recording session and continue the story of 80K soon. We'll see you when we return to the recording studio. Okay, so we're back talking about the history of 80,000 hours again. Last time we were talking about going through Y Combinator in 2015, and then the general success that we had working, I guess, focusing on the web content and newsletter subscriptions in kind of late 2015, 2016, 2017. Yeah, were there any things you wanted to add about that era that we didn't already say?
Well, I just think that was, looking back, a really successful era where we only had around 5 people on the team, and we managed to grow to a website with 1.5 million views per year, and I think about 150,000 newsletter subscribers. And as a result, in the effective altruism surveys, often 80,000 hours was the biggest single pathway by which new people were getting into finding out about effective altruism for the first time. We kind of, often word of mouth was ahead of us. And I think in one year we were even a bigger source than word of mouth for finding people. And I think that was where a lot of our historical impact came from, was just telling people about effective altruism and telling them about the ideas for the first time and getting them involved with the community. And for a really small team to be doing that, I think that was, looking back, we were very productive at that point.
That's the time when we had a lot of growth in newsletter subscriptions, a lot of growth in web traffic. It's when we wrote some of our most popular articles that were aimed at a reasonably broad audience. I suppose, there was the Career Guide, which had 13 or so articles, including some on general themes like what makes for a satisfying job, what makes, how to get jobs, how to do interviews, that kind of thing. But of course, all kind of with an effective altruist flavor and connection to it, but also hitting on things that are of interest to everyone.
Yeah, totally.
Might be worth mentioning, an amusing thing is that a lot of that career guide was written by you when we were on a trip to Thailand. I think at one point there was only 3 of us full-time staff members, at least only 3 of us locally. And we thought, well, why are we doing this in Oxford when we could be going somewhere with much nicer weather? And we went to Chiang Mai for a while.
I guess the team at that point was, we had Roman writing articles, you were writing articles, Peter Hartree was the lead engineer, and then there was me. And that was basically it.
I think Maria Gutierrez was, I think, also doing some stuff for us at that point, but
on a part-time basis.
Yeah, but Hartree was remote, so it was only you, me, and Roman who were in person. So it was very easy to up sticks and just go to Thailand if we felt like it. And I think it allowed a lot of focus because we didn't have to. Well, we we weren't getting drawn into things happening with other organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did use those periods. Didn't we kind of partly say deliberately, this is just going to be a content-focused period where we'll kind of clear out everything else?
Definitely.
And what was it? We spent 5-6 weeks in Chiang Mai?
I think it might even be more than that because we got visas for there. So I think it could be 2 or 3 months, possibly in Chiang Mai. And then we didn't feel like we wanted to go home quite yet. And you traveled in China before and spoke Chinese. So we decided to go to Chengdu.
Yeah, to Chengdu, yeah. One of my favorite cities in China. And I remember, that was actually quite a lot of work to find an Airbnb in Chinese in Chengdu. And I remember that actually we finally found a place that seemed like it might be good, but it was 1 bedroom too short because one of the bedrooms was a mezzanine. So it was open to the living room. And I told this to the host, that's the problem. And she was like, don't worry, I'll install a wall. And then the next day she messaged me to be like, okay, there is now a wall.
Yeah, it was incredible. I guess just taking the space and making it completely private. And I think we might have even seen the person who was still just putting the finishing work on the on the wall when we arrived. It's not so easy to visit China these days, so I'm really glad to have gotten in a trip to China for a month or 5 weeks.
I think China. I think we were only there for about 3 weeks.
Okay, yeah,
and that was when Peter McIntyre started. So his first 3 weeks at 8,000 hours were actually in China. So he just flew there straight to meet us.
Yeah,
which was quite a big introduction.
The food there was incredible, and I think we were all just astonished by how well organized the country was. Compared to Oxford or London, it felt like things worked much more smoothly, which I wasn't entirely.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, right. I mean, we had your help to get us around because almost nobody spoke English, so it was definitely challenging at times. But yeah, I mean, those retreats I think were super productive times because we just put everything else aside and focused on writing and publishing and focusing on the web content. So that probably did contribute to that being a bit of a golden era for web traffic growth.
Yeah, I mean, and I think more generally, Weiss just being really focused on just one product and one set of metrics, and that's something that YC encouraged us to do. I think also just that you kind of get a critical mass where you're bouncing ideas off each other. So you were really good at thinking of things, and Will was also kind of a bit more involved with 80K at that point. And yeah, just the team as a whole, we were, I don't know, it's just we would think of things quickly and yeah.
Okay, so
I suppose at some point we kind of switched from that approach. I think it was in 2017 or 18. Maybe yeah. Do you want to talk about why things changed?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a kind of gradual thing, but I think around 2017, things started to go less well in a bunch of ways. And looking back, it wasn't clear at the time, but we hit a plateau of web traffic. So in 2017, it was 1.6 million, and then we didn't break that until 2020. And also when we looked like this, we only found out this a few years later, but 2017 was also a really outstanding year for plan changes and finding people changing their careers. And yeah, I mean, actually, it's still, in our last evaluation, it was still the best year for plan changes historically, though we don't know what the last couple of years were like. I would hope that now 2022 will be ahead of 2017, but yeah, we won't know that for a few years.
So yeah, at some point we started to feel uncomfortable perhaps with how broad the content was. And we were thinking maybe this isn't actually focused enough on the topics that we think are the highest priority.
Well, okay, no. So I think the bigger issue was that we basically started to set up a bunch of other programs and became unfocused again.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing was during YC, we shut down the one-on-one program. So A2K kind of historically has been online content, then that helps us find people, and then we speak to them one-on-one. And it's this kind of complementary thing. Yeah, so we'd always had this idea that we would bring back the one-on-one advice or the in-person advice in some form. And we came across Peter McIntyre, who we were really excited about hiring. So we thought, okay, he could start doing some type of in-person program again. He didn't actually do one-on-one advice to start with. He started him back doing the workshops. So the career guide was, for a while, I just did these in-person workshops that would take 4 or 5 hours. And we would basically lead someone through all the material in the career guide and get them to think about how it might apply to their own career over an afternoon. Yeah. And people seem to really like those. And that was basically what then was turned into the career guide later. And you can actually see on YouTube, there's a video version of me giving this as a lecture in Cambridge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we should have actually then stopped there. And then it's like you do the workshops, then you make them online and you have them as videos. And then you've like kind of succeeded. Yeah. But instead we were like, okay, let's go and have in-person ones again. So Peter did that, and this kind of insanely productive period where he did about 50 in-person workshops in 1 year.
Wow. Yeah.
Where he'd sometimes do like multiple in a couple of days
That guy has a lot of social energy. I think I did a handful of them, and that was tiring enough for me.
Yeah, they're pretty exhausting just to do one, yeah. But then Peter, I think, correctly realized that it would be better to be much more targeted instead. And so he said we should do one-on-one careers advice again with people coming through the website with an application form. And so we restarted the one-on-one program with Peter running it. And I think, okay, if we'd just done that, I think that could have been a pretty reasonable place to be. It's just like, well, we have the online content and we have one-on-one, which is kind of our original model. But then we instead went on to set up 3 more programs relatively soon after. So one being the podcast, which looking back, that was clearly a great thing to have done. So I wouldn't call that a mistake, though I think if we just had the web content and the podcast, I think that would have also been a really natural place to be, because that's a kind of classic content org playbook. Like if you think about Vox or something, they have articles and they have their YouTube channel and they have their podcast.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a natural package of stuff that's all it's kind of a similar skill set to do these different things.
Yeah, totally.
So that would have also been a really good direction to go down. And then maybe the next step would have been to add a YouTube channel. But yeah, so instead we did the podcast and we brought back the one-on-one team. And then after a year or so, Peter thought that headhunting might be more impactful than one-on-one. And I got convinced of that as well. And so then we basically split the one-on-one team into an advising team headed by Brenton, I think, and then later joined by Michelle. And then a headhunting team, which was Neil and Peter. And then also we were like, actually, it seems like having a job board would be really effective, probably more effective than advising. So Peter set up a job board page on the website. And then when Peter McIntyre, I think, moved to headhunting, then Peter Hartree ended up focusing on kind of making the job board his main thing for a while.
Okay. So what was going through our heads? Because of course we knew all of this stuff about focus, but we still slightly fell for this issue of coming up with so many products.
Looking back, I'm like, I don't quite see how I managed to, like, it seems like such an obvious mistake looking back.
Was it driven by, I suppose, we would like to grow, would like to hire, but then the new people you want to hire, that they have a particular skill set that's a better fit for a different program, or they have a passion for a particular different program that they want to lead on. And so that is kind of an instigator for starting something new?
I think that was a factor. And I think looking back, one lesson one kind of rule of thumb now I would try to follow is if you're setting up a new program in order to retain a particular staff member, you probably shouldn't. I think within effective altruism thinking, there is also, it's just so seductive to be thinking at the margin.
Do you want to explain what you mean by that?
Well, you're kind of like, well, we're doing these two great things now. If we add a third thing, then that will be even better because we'll just be doing more. Because the costs of loss of focus, they're kind of more nebulous than the just concrete extra impact. And so, yeah, we were kind of like, well, we're like doing advising, maybe headhunting's even better. Let's experiment with that, see how it goes. Maybe then we'll have both. And then that's kind of even better than just having one of them. But I think another rule of thumb I would say looking back is like, don't start a new program unless you think it's at least several fold better, maybe threefold or something.
Huh.
And, we thought headhunting was like maybe twofold better. We didn't really have strong reasons to think that. I think that was actually just below the threshold at which you should switch. We should have just carried on with advising until that was more scaled up and then added headhunting later.
Right. But yeah, I'm sure listeners can understand if your intuition is that this other program is going to be twice as good as the existing one, it's so seductive to start it. Like, how do you say no to that? I suppose in this case, maybe we could have said, well, the evidence isn't strong enough, so we should just stick with what we have.
Yeah, and I guess there is a kind of sense that if literally the expected value is twice as high, then you should.
Yeah.
But it's more like, what I more mean is like you have a kind of rough back of the envelope, which is like, oh, maybe it's twice as good. But that's probably going to regress a lot when you actually do the thing. Like probably your estimate is over optimistic.
Well, and I suppose it's also just not picking up all of these effects that you have on other programs, and lack of focus, lack of coordination across the organization.
Well, we then had to invest a lot in kind of getting headhunting going, so it was kind of below its potential for a while. Whereas instead, we could have been doubling down on having a much bigger advising team. So it's this kind of there's this kind of dynamic aspect as well. Yeah, I think even now it's a pretty controversial topic. How many programs should 80,000 hours have? And I've gone back and forth over the years. The other mistake I think we made around this period was moving to California.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So when we were in YC, we kind of drunk the Kool-Aid a bit. We're like, Silicon Valley, it's the center of the world. This is like where all the most ambitious people are. And we did get a lot out of being in YC. And it was also, it probably was the key hub of effective altruism. It was like definitely, it's basically going in that direction. So we were like, well, we want to be at the center of things. We should move. And we did a process about it. We figured our hiring would be better there. It would be better to be part of the community there and the Silicon Valley community.
Yeah, I remember one factor that stood out, or the most salient factor in my mind, was that the labor market was massively larger, that suddenly you can hire from a labor pool of 330 million rather than, I suppose at this point, the UK decided to leave the EU. So we were talking about just a labor market of 65 million.
I don't know. I guess a lot of Europeans also don't want to move to Silicon Valley, but it's probably a slightly easier pitch than getting Americans to move to the UK.
Yeah.
Like one big, like American salaries are way higher. It's just one kind of bottleneck you have to get past.
So these are some of the reasons we decided to move. Do you think it was a mistake in retrospect?
Well, yeah. So, it was a lot of work to get the visas and to move house and to, figure out how to do American taxes and kind of move our whole lives. And then within 2 years, we moved back to London, which was also quite a lot of work.
Yeah.
So, it was very costly and we did decide to move back. I think the key thing is that we did get a lot of benefits from being there. And I think in particular, we got to know some of the people, the effective altruism people and living in the Bay a lot better. And, that also in particular led to hiring Howie. So I don't know, maybe that alone was worth it.
Yeah.
But I think we could have got a lot of the benefits by just spending 1 to 3 months there per year and pretty much without any of the costs.
Yeah. Do you think we could have known ahead of time? So I guess we decided to move there in 2016, maybe in mid 2016, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Should we have been able to predict at the time that this was a bad idea? I remember I said that I was neutral on it. I think I neither voted for it nor voted against it. But I remember declaring to a group of people a few weeks before we went that I was like, we're going to not like this and we're going to regret it. But by the time we realize it's going to be too late and we'll be too committed to the Bay to move back, which was almost right, but not, I was wrong about the last bit.
Well, yeah, so it did turn out to be worse than we expected because we thought it would be better for hiring, but actually we didn't hire any Americans in that whole 2 years except for Howie.
Yeah.
And in fact, we were strongly considering hiring several British people.
Yeah. Do you know what was going on with that? Is that just happenstance or I think it is the case that
concentration of people who are interested in effective altruism is greater in the London, Cambridge, Oxford area. Sorry, that certainly than the US as it was. I think our ideas are more popular in the UK per capita than they are in the United States per capita. And possibly there's even more people who have an 80,000 hour style of thinking in London, Oxford, Cambridge than there is in the Bay Area, though it might be
we're definitely unclear. I mean, we've definitely been overrepresented. The UK is overrepresented in our audience because of being from the UK.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that we didn't end up hiring more Americans, given that seemed like such a natural and salient benefit?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it was probably just partly bad luck, but then I think just partly like there isn't that big a difference in the number of really engaged EAs who are willing to move to London versus are willing to move to San Francisco. Like it's about 50-50. Maybe it's like slightly tilted towards San Francisco, but then actually I think another factor was just our network was UK heavy. And that was maybe just about enough to kind of, maybe Silicon Valley, maybe like the Bay Area, it's like the labor market there is, maybe it's like 1.3 times bigger than the UK cluster. But then just our network thing was like enough to tilt it towards being a wash, basically equal.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the decision to come back?
I mean, this is like another aspect of why it turned out to be a mistake is I remember in the document saying this will be personally worse for me, but I think it's worth it for the greater impact for the org.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I said, we're going to regret this. I was like, this is just clearly going to be worse from my personal point of view. I know far fewer people there. I feel like I have a great cultural fit here in Oxford, so why?
Yeah, so I think we did kind of realize it would be worse, but I think at least personally, I probably underestimated it, yeah. And then I think I also maybe underestimated how much like making the personal sacrifice would bug me. Well, I mean, moving country is a big deal, and I had friends from university who weren't involved with effective altruism, and I really valued that social scene. And then we moved to Berkeley, where we didn't really know anyone who wasn't working in effective altruism. And so I kind of lost that social scene that was really important to me. And then in addition, it was at least the proximate trigger of ending almost a 5-year long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And so like the combination of those two things happening at the same time was like, it's like losing the relationship and also not having a social scene to find a new partner. So that was pretty tough.
It's something that I hadn't really thought about ahead of time is that when you move to a new place for work, then almost everyone you meet for quite a while is people who you're connected to through work. And it really reduces the diversification in your friendship group. And that can take quite a long time to build back in. I was only starting to do that, I think, in the UK after many years of living there, to start to meet more and more people who didn't have anything to do with effective altruism, which was really great.
And I think also San Francisco, it's hard to break out of tech people.
Yeah,
because just in general, the city is way more dominated by one industry.
Yeah, it's a real hub for a particular set of interests. In this case, it was particularly rough because it was potentially, forever changing your lifestyle in a way that was very hard to undo without I guess, quitting your job. And so even if you're willing to make that sacrifice at that point, many years later, it could grate a whole lot more if you come to the point where you're thinking, my life just isn't what I actually wanted it to be. Structurally, it feels wrong.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess just in a way that's saying it's like maybe a bigger sacrifice than it looks at first. I mean, I guess that was the impetus for moving back, was I was much less happy. And I realized I knew one of the factors was being based in the Bay. So that kind of made it a topic of discussion. And then I remember it was then Howie, we were eating vegetarian Chinese food at our favorite restaurant in Berkeley. And he was just like, well, actually, should we consider moving back? And then we started a kind of more formal process where we polled everyone on their preferences, and we reanalyzed recent hiring and, which people would have preferred to be based in which places, and tried to kind of estimate. And we realized that the hiring wasn't as good as we thought. And we also realized that I think it was pretty clear that the team at that point's preferences was to be in London.
Yeah. So I think the immediate instigator was that we were getting very close to signing a 5-year contract on an office in San Francisco. And then Howie raised the question, it doesn't seem like you really want to be living here. So why are we signing this contract to stay in a place that quite a few of you seem unhappy in? And so there was you and me, I think, who were pretty keen to go back. A few Australians who I think generally lean towards going back. They're not as strong. And then quite a few people who missed home who were British.
The other big benefit we didn't realize is we didn't actually end up being very involved with the Silicon Valley community at all. After YC ended, that kind of fell away a bit. So that didn't end up being a benefit like we hoped.
Yeah, I don't know that was necessarily a mistake. 'Cause unfortunately, I think our ideas perhaps they just don't tie into entrepreneurship exactly in that way. We're not necessarily trying to start lots of for-profit companies, or as the cards have just fell in such a way that it doesn't seem like that's usually the best way to have an impact, or at least not the way that we've focused on. So it wasn't, the synergies weren't quite as strong as what we might have expected.
Yeah, but I did get really useful advice on how to run an org. And I did still keep getting some of that advice. I would still meet the YC partners every now and again.
Yeah.
But I could have imagined being more involved and maybe just meeting. When we first arrived in the Valley, we met like people from the PayPal Mafia. We met Reid Hoffman. We met like all the founder of Gmail as our mentor at YC. And we met Sam Altman and Paul Graham. And this was all really exciting. But then I was kind of like, maybe that's going to continue, and we'll meet like Jeff Bezos as well, but that didn't. That
didn't happen.
Yeah,
right.
Which maybe could have happened if I'd carried on kind of pursuing that and socializing with those types of people, but just we didn't.
We didn't do so. Yeah. Okay, we spent a lot of time talking about mistakes that we've made over the years, which I guess is natural because that's the kind of thing it's very easy to learn from. But we should also spend some time thinking about what we did right, what some of 80,000 hours' strengths were. What's one that stands out for you?
Yeah, the biggest one that comes to mind we already covered, which was focusing on the online content, focusing on content that would get search traffic and kind of building up the web traffic, especially the 2015 to 2017 period. But then, more just like with the org in general, one thing that comes to mind almost sounds kind of simple, but it's just trying quite hard to stick to basic org processes. Learning about like the kind of basic things you should do as a line manager and doing them. So having like quarterly feedback rounds and having weekly one-on-ones and actually writing down goals each week and checking whether you did them or not.
Yeah.
And this stuff it all sounds quite obvious, but it actually takes a lot of kind of conscientiousness to just keep consistently doing that every week. And it makes a big difference. I think it's made a big difference in terms of, one thing is, it seems like there's often been an impression that 80,000 hours is generally pretty well run. And I think that's reflected in our retention stats, which I don't actually have the latest ones, but I would say over our history, it's probably over 90%.
Yeah. I think so. Stuff that we did really consistently, having line manager meetings regularly and following, a particular kind of format for having those so that you don't miss stuff. Having all hands meetings, or as the org has grown, all of these schedules have shifted. But there was a time when when there was only a few of us every week, we would meet and discuss what had happened the previous week and what we were going to do next week, and looking at the metrics and so on. There's also kind of feedback rounds that you do regularly. Yeah, the open meetings where people can bring up issues with their line manager that might not fit into a normal weekly meeting. Yeah, reviewing metrics on a particular cycle so that you can then change it. We did bouts for a while where you'd set goals for, say, the next 10 weeks or so, and then you would try to finish particular things by the end of that bout. And then at the end of that, you review that and come up with a new plan for the next bout, which I think was it's very good to provide structure in something that otherwise doesn't naturally have cycles in it. Yeah, are there any others that...
Yeah, I guess a lot of this, someone who's worked in a tech startup before might just think this all sounds so obvious that it's like, why are we even mentioning this? But at least some of the organizations in the community didn't do these things, especially early on.
Yeah.
I think we were one of the fastest to kind of implement that whole package. I think a lot of stuff when they join, they say one of the things that really attracted them was they feel like we have a very supportive culture, which maybe it's maybe you can speak to this better than me. But for instance, I've always, at least with the people I managed, I always tried to be very pragmatic about problems, and that made people feel like they could bring things up.
Yeah.
And this would also extend to things like mental health, where I always just tried to be able to talk about them openly and just take a kind of pragmatic approach, like what's going to work type approach to it.
Yeah, definitely. We have a culture where I think by and large people feel pretty safe to talk about mental health issues that they're facing, and to share tips and tricks with one another about what things they're trying and what's working for them, and feel fine telling their manager that they were pretty down this week, so they didn't get so much done. I think by and large for some people that's just incredibly valuable and almost essential in a place that they're going to work, depending on what they're like as a person. Because if you're feeling down and then you're struggling with work and then you kind of have to put on a front with your manager that you're getting things done that you're not, can potentially start a very negative spiral for folks. And 80,000 hours has always steered pretty clear of that dynamic. So I value that personally as well.
Yeah, and then I think people find the culture quite friendly. And then I think we've also put a lot of effort into things like having a nice office and just generally trying to make it a nice place to work, having like good policies about like maternity leave and things like that. And also pushing to raise salaries probably ahead of many orgs.
Yeah.
We've hired a bunch of people who got kind of burned out at other EA orgs and then came to 80. This is something that attracted them to 80K.
Yeah.
And I think it's also contributed to just having less problems with lots of like drama and burnout and things like that than is often common.
Yeah, I mean, we're also just hiring so many great people. It seems like, the caliber of the people who are interested in working at 80,000 hours is just really wonderful. So in the past, we've often felt a little bit, many years ago, I think we felt quite limited by our ability to hire exactly the people with the skills that we wanted. But at this point, we're really able to we're really able to grow the inputs and grow the outputs pretty reliably. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, and then I mean, looking forward, I think, a big priority is just to actually get to the point where, say, the majority of students has even heard of us, which I think, we're still now a lot closer with the marketing scale up, but there's still a bunch more to be done there.
So one reason we've recorded this now is that after 10 years of leading 80,000 hours, more or less from its inception, you're handing over the reins and are going to be trying out some other projects. What are some of the reasons to be making that change?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on some of them before, but from around 2017, I started basically feeling gradually less aligned by the role and less motivated in it. And so, for instance, the thing I find most motivating is like spreading the ideas and writing and getting the ideas out there. And so when the organization was more focused on content and I had time for writing, that felt like a better fit for me than now, where we have 4 programs, I guess almost 30 staff now, and hiring rapidly. A lot of the programs aren't doing content. So now what the org needs is more someone who just really wants to make management their main thing.
Yeah.
And throughout most of the history, I was kind of doing these 2 jobs where one was kind of head of product and almost author of a lot of our most central content. And then the other was being CEO. And that was pretty difficult to do both. And it just becomes harder and harder as the org grows.
Yeah, the more staff you're line managing and the more people involved in general, the more that just ends up eating the role, such that there's very little time left for creative work.
Yeah, and 80,000 hours, I would say, is almost harder to run than a typical org of this size because we have 4 programs. It would be much simpler if we just had 1 program. Then it would be easier to get your head around, and we kind of have 4, and each one's almost run by a mini CEO who has a lot of, like, they're developing them almost as separate products. So
yeah. Are there any other ways that the role became a worse fit over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on the most important things, the ones we just said, though. Yeah, there was probably some other stuff. I mean, we also mentioned earlier, I think there was something where the move to California kind of used up a bit of like sacrifice capital or something.
Yeah.
Which I think then turned into a factor. I think personally, the lack of growth in the web content was a kind of ongoing source of frustration for me, or affected my morale. And then, I don't know, there's maybe also just a sheer variety thing where I'm like very kind of, normally in most of my life, I really crave like new experiences. And so just doing the same thing for 10 years, a lot of stuff that was really interesting and fresh back in 2014. Okay, now it's like the 10th annual review.
Yeah, we've both, I guess, we've both kind of been working on this stuff together for almost 10 years. It's been a long while. 80,000 hours has changed. We've both grown up a bunch. Nobody could say you haven't given a lot to 80,000 hours over all this time.
Yeah, there was a tension going back almost to the start where it was always just I wanted to do more writing, but it was kind of hard to fit around running the rest of the org. Yeah, it just generally became more intense over time.
Totally.
All those factors were making me less motivated in the role and less of a good fit for it.
Okay, well, we are almost out of time here. But did you have anything you wanted to say about the future of 80K before we go?
So I think like just for what might be in store in the next few years is, it seems like compared to say 2020, 2021, we could triple our audience from there and really reach, become a thing where it's a pretty well-known, if you're really serious about social impact, among students, that would just be like a typical thing to check out would be 80,000 hours. And yeah, we could then at that point be doing calls with maybe 3, even 5,000 people a year, both new people coming in and doing calls with people who we already know. It's that kind of like that community builds up bigger and bigger each year. But yeah, we could also imagine with one-on-one, there's adding headhunting back, which we've started doing. And just in general, like as the readership gets bigger and bigger, 80,000 Hours is mostly in the past focused on getting new people into effective altruism for the first time, which I think is actually this is a whole other topic, but I think there's a thing that confuses people about 80,000 Hours is they kind of think that what we're doing is providing the best possible careers advice for people in effective altruism. But actually, I think a lot of the impacts come from getting new people in rather than, as we've reached more and more people, it becomes more and more important to focus on directing our existing and helping to coordinate our existing community of readers to actually solve all these problems that we're talking about. And there's a huge amount to be done. And you can imagine in 10 or 20 years, if current trends continue, there'll be Nobel Prize winning scientists, and there'll be top politicians and more tech CEOs who are people, and just also tens of thousands of people who've all been influenced by 80,000 Hours.
Yeah.
And what that community might be able to do if it's able to coordinate and be able to start projects and get them staffed by the headhunting team, you can imagine really like getting a lot done in the next couple of decades.
Yeah, there's so much we still don't know, or the range of problems that we could look into and develop a really deep understanding of, and especially potentially having specialists who really deeply know some particular problem area or some particular career path. That's something we haven't hit the scale at where we can do that very much yet. But
that would be another big avenue for expansion would be just having a big research team who are actually able to cover all of the courses and different career options.
Yeah. Well, I've been fully committed to the 80,000 Hours thing since I moved to the UK in 2012, and I've never doubted that we would continue to grow and continue to have more impact, and eventually our ideas would cut through and be able to help a lot of people do more good. Whether or not we'll reach a research team of hundreds of people and so on, I'm not sure, but I'm very optimistic about the next few years. So yeah, thanks so much for getting 80,000 Hours to this point and being such a pleasure to work with for a decade now. My guest today has been Benjamin Todd. Thanks so much for coming on 80K After Hours, Ben.
Cool, thanks, Rob.
All right, so as I mentioned in the intro, in a funny coincidence, 80,000 Hours is currently looking for a new CEO because our current CEO is heading off to work at Open Philanthropy. And if you're the kind of person who listened enthusiastically to that whole interview between me and Ben, even if you're not suitable for the role, you probably are among the 1% most suitable people in the entire world for the CEO position. Though I would note 80,000 Hours is quite a bit bigger and quite a bit more formal than the era that Benjamin and I were talking about through most of that conversation. Anyway, we're currently accepting expressions of interest in the role, and they will be open until the 10th of December. So do get on this fairly quickly if you are excited about the idea. On top of the CEO vacancy, as I mentioned in the intro, there's a decent chance that we promote someone from within 80,000 Hours to become the CEO, which would then open up the position that they're currently in. So at the same time as we're asking people to let us know if they think they have what it takes to be CEO, we're also curious to know if they might be interested in applying to be our Director of Internal Systems, Website Director, or Director of Special Projects, should one of those positions just happen to open up. You can find the job ad for all of that on our website at 80,000hours.org/latest, or if you Google 80,000 Hours Work With Us, that should bring you to the page that lists all of our current job vacancies. If you're curious, you should really go read that, but a few things that I can say about the role. Our CEO is, as you might expect, ultimately responsible for increasing the positive social impact that's generated by 80,000 Hours. In practice, currently, they line manage 5 people. Those are the directors of the website, podcast, one-on-one advising, internal systems, and special projects. The CEO's main responsibilities include setting the strategy for 80,000 Hours, including what audiences we should target with what kinds of recommendations and which impact metrics we should be keeping in mind, inspiring the entire organization to be ambitious and trying to have more impact, hiring, retaining, and firing senior staff, ensuring we keep the positive aspects of our team culture like curiosity, honesty, and kindness, ensuring we remain highly organized and functional as we are at the moment, managing relationships with our key donors and other stakeholders, and I guess just addressing any of the most important and thorny issues that come up anywhere in the organization. In terms of the other 3 roles that I mentioned, the Director of Internal Systems currently has a team of around 5 and oversees our operations, legal compliance, hiring, and office. The website director manages a team of around 8 and is focused on maintaining and building the website, producing written content, improving our career advice and our newsletter, and marketing our services in order to reach a whole lot of new users. And the Director of Special Projects is a kind of generalist role that involves leading or managing, various ad hoc projects on behalf of the CEO, usually in the strategy or operations space. And those projects change from time to time, but they can include project managing fundraising, the annual review, updating salaries, and helping with strategy refreshes for individual teams. And we think the sort of person that we're looking to hire for CEO has many or most of these traits, including being willing to live in or near London and work from the office that we have here. They have substantial experience managing people or projects. They're able to initiate difficult conversations, able to preserve good relationships among staff. We're looking for someone who's able to identify and focus on the most important uncertainties that we face, is able to set strategy for a big project with an appropriate amount of decisiveness. We're looking for someone who has a broad and deep understanding of current advanced thinking about how to make the world a better place in the way that 80,000 Hours understands it. Of course, we're looking for someone who can motivate and inspire people to follow their vision. Someone who's resilient to the inevitable challenges and setbacks that come with leadership. Someone with a track record of working hard. Someone who's likely to work at 80,000 hours for at least 3 years if they come on as CEO. And someone who likes the sound of our cultural values, which are aiming for ambitious long-term impact, having a modest scientific mindset, openness and honesty, focus, fun and friendliness, self-care and personal growth, and finally, aiming for exceptionally well-researched advice. In terms of thinking about the scale of 80,000 hours and the impact you might be able to have, I can give you some indications of how large 80,000 hours is. So in terms of scale, during 2023, we're going to spend about $6 million and have an average of 27 primary staff plus 6 full-time equivalent contractors. We've grown around 30% per year over the last 2 years and aim to kind of maintain or increase that growth ideally. And on top of that, we'll spend around $3 million on marketing in 2023, a figure that we also aim to increase in future years if we can find cost-effective methods to do that marketing. And in terms of intermediate outputs, in 2023, we'll have about 750,000 click-throughs to high-impact jobs on our job board, around 250,000 new subscribers to our weekly email newsletter, about 300,000 hours of listening time on our podcast, spread across about 100,000 subscribers, over 3 million unique visitors to our website, over 1,500 one-on-one conversations with people who, in my view, are embarrassingly talented and looking to change their careers in order to have more impact, as well as tens of millions of ad impressions across sponsored videos and social media and so on. All right, that's plenty for me to read here. If your interest has been piqued, go find that job ad at 80,000hours.org/latest, or of course by Googling 80,000 hours work with us. Again, expressions of interest close on the 10th of December. All right. Audio mastering and technical editing for this episode by Ben Cordell and Ryan Kessler. Full transcripts and an extensive collection of links to learn more are available on our site and put together by Katie Moore. And Kieran Harris produces the show. Thanks for listening.